I am Teresa Miller, 68 years old, and until last summer, I thought I knew what family meant. My son Jackson and I were always close, at least until he married Allison. I never imagined they would abandon me at a gas station in Wyoming during our family vacation, leaving me stranded with nothing but my purse. What they never expected was that I would sell their house right out from under them while they continued their vacation without me. If you are watching this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Grab some tea, this story is going to make your blood boil. To understand how things got to this point, we need to go back a bit. I was widowed 5 years ago when my husband Franklin passed away suddenly from a heart attack. We had been married for 42 wonderful years. Franklin was my rock, my partner in everything. Losing him left a hole in my life that I never thought could be filled. But I still had my son Jackson, who had always been the light of my life. I should mention that I raised Jackson largely on my own for several years after my early divorce from his father when Jackson was only 4. His father moved across the country and barely kept in touch, sending sporadic child support payments that barely covered our basic needs. Those years were tough, working 2 jobs, sometimes just to keep a roof over our heads, but Jackson and I developed a special bond. We were a team, just the 2 of us, against the world. I attended every school event, helped with every homework assignment, and celebrated every milestone, big or small. I thought we had built something unbreakable. Jackson met Allison at a company event 12 years ago. He worked in software development, and she was in the marketing department. At first, I was thrilled. Allison seemed sweet, intelligent, and she made my son happy. Their wedding was beautiful, and I welcomed her into our family with open arms. For the first few years, our relationship was good. We would have Sunday dinners together, go shopping occasionally, and she would even call me for advice now and then. Then came my grandchildren, Sophie and Tyler. Sophie arrived first 10 years ago. She was a beautiful baby, with Jackson's curious eyes and quick smile. Tyler followed 2 years later, a more serious child, but with the same kind heart as his father. I fell in love with those children instantly, and being a grandmother gave me a new purpose after losing Franklin. When Jackson and Allison were looking to buy their first house 8 years ago, they struggled to come up with the down payment. Property in our area had become increasingly expensive, and even with their combined incomes, they were finding it difficult to save enough. I had just received Franklin's life insurance money, and without hesitation I offered to help. I gave them $85,000 toward their down payment, nearly a third of what I had received. What many people might consider foolish, but what would prove crucially important later, was that my name was added to the house deed as a co-owner with 25% ownership. At the time, it was presented as a way to avoid gift taxes, and seemed like a formality since I told them I considered the money a gift. Jackson insisted that this would protect my investment, and I agreed without giving it much thought. I trusted my son completely. After Franklin died, the big house we had shared for decades felt too empty, too full of memories. I decided to sell it and downsize. The housing market had improved, and I received a good price for our family home. Some of that money went into my retirement account, but I also used a significant portion to help Jackson and Allison pay for their children's private school tuition and various home improvements they wanted to make. About 18 months ago, another opportunity to help arose. Allison wanted to go back to work full-time after being a stay-at-home mom for several years, but the cost of after-school childcare was prohibitive. Jackson suggested that I could move in with them to help with the children. They had a guest room that could become mine, and I could save on housing costs while helping my family. It seemed like the perfect solution for everyone. The first few months were wonderful. I enjoyed spending more time with my grandchildren, walking them home from the bus stop, helping with homework, and preparing dinner for the family most nights. The children loved having me there, and I felt useful and valued. But gradually, I started noticing subtle signs of tension. Allison would make passive-aggressive comments about how I loaded the dishwasher or folded the laundry. Small criticisms that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively formed a pattern. She began rearranging things I had cleaned or organized, implying that my way was somehow inferior. Jackson was working longer hours, often not home until after the children were in bed. When family decisions needed to be made, I found myself increasingly excluded from the conversation. Despite living under the same roof and contributing to the household both financially and through my labor, I was being treated more like a guest who had overstayed her welcome rather than a family member. My daily routine became quite structured around the needs of the household. I would wake up early to prepare breakfast for everyone, pack lunches for the children, and make sure they were dressed and ready for school. Jackson would usually rush out with a quick thank you and a peck on my cheek, while Allison would inspect the lunches I made occasionally, repacking them with different snacks, without explanation. After the morning rush, I would clean the kitchen, do laundry, and handle various household chores. By afternoon, I would walk 4 blocks to meet Sophie and Tyler at their bus stop, then supervise homework while preparing dinner. I wanted to make myself useful to earn my keep, so to speak. But as time went on, Allison became increasingly controlling over household decisions despite my significant contributions. She would rearrange the furniture in common areas without discussion, change dinner plans last minute after I had already purchased ingredients, and implement new house rules without consulting me. There were specific incidents that still sting when I think about them. Once I spent an entire afternoon making a special lasagna recipe that had been Franklin's favorite, excited to share this piece of family history with my grandchildren. When dinner time came, Allison announced she had ordered pizza because she did not feel like heavy food. My lasagna sat untouched, eventually finding its way to the trash. Another time, during a discussion about repainting the living room, I suggested a warm beige that would complement their furniture. Allison not only dismissed my idea, but did so with a condescending smile, saying, "Teresa, color trends have changed since your day. We need something more modern." Jackson said nothing, avoiding eye contact with me. The financial aspects of our arrangement became increasingly one-sided as well. I had initially agreed to contribute $700 monthly toward household expenses, a fair amount considering the local rental market. But unexpected costs kept appearing. School fundraisers, household repairs, even groceries seemed to become primarily my responsibility. When I would buy groceries, spending easily $200 each week, there was never any acknowledgement, just an expectation that this was my duty. The first major conflict came about 6 months after I moved in. I had been helping Tyler with his math homework using a method I had learned as a teacher before retirement. Allison overheard and interrupted, criticizing my approach in front of Tyler. "You are confusing him, Teresa," she said sharply. "They teach math differently now. You cannot use these outdated methods." I tried to explain that Tyler had been struggling with the new method, and I was simply showing him an alternative way to understand the concept, but she cut me off. "We are trying to raise independent children, not ones who need their grandmother to do everything for them." The comment hurt deeply, not just because it was unfair, but because it was said in front of Tyler, who looked embarrassed and confused. When I tried to discuss this with Jackson that evening, he took Allison's side. "Mom, she is just trying to be consistent with what they learn at school. Maybe you could check with her before you jump in to help." That night, unable to sleep, I overheard a conversation between them through the thin wall separating our rooms. Allison's voice came through clearly. "We need to find a solution to the Teresa problem," she was saying. "This was supposed to be temporary, but it's been 6 months, and she is taking over everything." Jackson's response was too quiet to make out clearly, but I caught phrases like, "She means well, and my mother in retirement home." The next morning, I tried to talk to Jackson privately to express how I was feeling, but he was defensive before I could even fully explain. "Mom, we're all adjusting here," he said, checking his watch repeatedly. "Allison is under a lot of pressure at her new job, and the kids are in a transitional phase. We just need to be patient with each other." But patience seemed to be expected only from me, never from Allison. The children noticed the tension, of course. Children always do. One evening, while Allison and Jackson were at a work function, Sophie asked me a question that broke my heart. "Grandma, why does Mom always seem angry when you talk?" I tried to explain in a way that wouldn't paint her mother in a negative light. "Sometimes grown-ups have different ideas about how things should be done, sweetie. Your mom and I both love you very much, we just show it differently sometimes." But the truth was, I was becoming increasingly lonely and felt trapped financially. I had sold my home and invested much of my savings in helping Jackson and his family. Moving out would mean finding an apartment I could afford on my fixed income, which in our expensive area seemed nearly impossible. Still, for the first time, I began to seriously consider my options, wondering if my independence was worth the financial strain it would cause. Every summer, Jackson and his family took an annual vacation to Yellowstone National Park. It was a tradition they had started when Sophie was just 4 years old, and they had continued it every year since. As July approached, I overheard them making plans for this year's trip, discussing routes, accommodations, and activities. What struck me immediately was that I wasn't included in any of these conversations. One evening, about 2 weeks before their planned departure, Jackson approached me somewhat awkwardly. "Mom, we were thinking since you're living with us now, maybe you'd like to join us for Yellowstone this year." The invitation felt obligatory and afterthought, but I was hopeful that perhaps this shared experience could help repair some of the growing distance between us. A week together away from the routine stresses of everyday life might give us all a chance to reconnect. So I enthusiastically accepted, perhaps too eagerly in retrospect. "I'd love to," I said. "I haven't been to Yellowstone since you were a teenager, Jackson." The next 2 weeks were filled with preparations. I offered to help with the packing, meal planning, and even put together activity bags for the children for the long drive. I spent nearly $300 on new hiking shoes, appropriate clothing, and small gifts for Sophie and Tyler to open during the journey. Despite the underlying tensions, I felt genuinely excited about the trip and the possibility it represented for our family. The day of departure arrived, and we were up before dawn to get an early start. The car was packed the night before, with my suitcase tucked in the very back of their SUV. The plan was to drive through several states, making it a road trip adventure with the first night stop in western Wyoming before reaching Yellowstone the following day. The first few hours of the drive were pleasant enough. Tyler and Sophie were excited, pointing out interesting sights and playing travel games I had prepared. Jackson was focused on driving, while Allison navigated and controlled the music selections. I sat in the back with the children, trying to keep them entertained and comfortable. Around lunchtime, we stopped at a diner. The conversation was strained but civil, with Allison making pointed comments about the schedule and how we needed to make good time. After lunch, the seating arrangement changed slightly, with Sophie moving to the middle seat between Tyler and me after complaining that her brother was taking up too much space. As the afternoon wore on, the children grew restless, despite my best efforts. Allison turned around at one point, giving me a look that suggested I wasn't managing them well enough. The atmosphere in the car grew increasingly tense. By late afternoon, we had crossed into Wyoming, the landscape becoming more rugged and remote. The children had finally fallen asleep, and a heavy silence filled the car. I noticed Jackson and Allison exchanging glances and whispered comments that I couldn't quite hear from the back seat. Around 6 in the evening, Jackson announced we needed to stop for gas. He pulled into a small, isolated service station in what seemed like the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of open Wyoming wilderness. "I need to use the restroom," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt, "and I thought I'd get some treats for the kids when they wake up." Allison nodded dismissively. "We're going to fill up and check the tire pressure." I went into the service station, used the restroom, and then spent some time selecting snacks I knew Sophie and Tyler would enjoy. I also bought some coffee for Jackson and Allison, thinking it might help ease the tension. The friendly cashier, an older woman whose name tag read Dorothy, chatted with me briefly about the beautiful but remote area. When I stepped back outside, perhaps 15 minutes after entering, my blood ran cold. The parking spot where our SUV had been was empty. I looked around, thinking perhaps they had moved to another spot, but the small parking area contained only 2 other vehicles, neither of them ours. At first, I thought there must be some mistake. Perhaps they had driven around to another part of the service station. I walked the perimeter of the building, my heart rate increasing with each step. Our SUV was nowhere to be found. I pulled out my cell phone with shaking hands and called Jackson's number. It rang several times before going to voicemail. I tried again immediately with the same result. Then I tried Allison's phone. Again, no answer. I sent text messages to both of them. "Where are you? Did you move the car outside the service station?" Minutes passed with no response. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. A sick feeling of dread settled in my stomach as the unthinkable possibility began to take shape in my mind. I called Jackson again and again and again. On the 5th attempt, I received a text message that made my knees buckle. "Mom, we need space. Find your way back." 7 words that confirmed my worst fear. They had left me. Deliberately. They had driven away knowing I was inside. leaving me stranded at a remote gas station in unfamiliar territory hundreds of miles from home. I must have made a sound, some involuntary cry of distress, because Dorothy, the cashier, came outside. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked, concern evident in her weathered face. I could barely speak through the shock. My family, they left me here." She helped me back inside, sat me down, and brought me a glass of water. As the reality of the situation sank in, I tried calling Jackson and Allison repeatedly. All my calls went straight to voicemail now. They had turned off their phones. With Dorothy watching sympathetically, I called the local police. The officer who answered was polite, but ultimately unhelpful. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this isn't technically a crime," he explained. "You weren't kidnapped or assaulted. If you're in need of shelter, I can give you the contact information for a local facility." I thanked him numbly and hung up. The realization of my predicament was overwhelming. I was a 68-year-old woman, stranded at a remote gas station as night approached, with only my purse containing my wallet, phone, and a few personal items. My luggage, clothing, medication, everything else was in the car with my son and his family as they drove away, continuing their vacation without me. Dorothy, the kind gas station attendant who had witnessed my breakdown, proved to be my first guardian angel in what would become an unexpected journey. After hearing my story, she made a phone call to a local church volunteer named Walter, who sometimes helped stranded travelers. While we waited for Walter to arrive, Dorothy brought me a sandwich and coffee from the station's small deli section. "I've seen all sorts in my 20 years working here," she said, her voice gentle with understanding. "But leaving a family member like this, especially at your age, that's a new low." Walter arrived about 45 minutes later, a tall, gray-haired man in his 70s driving an aging pickup truck. Dorothy had already explained my situation to him, sparing me from having to recount the painful details again. "I can drive you to Rollins," Walter offered. "It's about 95 miles east, but they have a bus station there. You might be able to get a bus heading back toward home." During the nearly 2-hour drive through the darkening Wyoming landscape, I had time to process what had happened. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a complex mixture of emotions: hurt, betrayal, anger, and humiliation. Walter, sensing my need for quiet contemplation, didn't press me to talk, only occasionally, pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about the area. My mind kept returning to that text message: "Mom, we need space. Find your way back." The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just forgotten me or had a momentary lapse in judgment. They had planned this. They had discussed it, decided on it, and executed it, leaving me in a potentially dangerous situation without concern for my welfare. By the time we reached Rollins, it was nearly 10 at night. Walter insisted on waiting with me at the small bus station until he was sure I could get a ticket. The financial strain of this unexpected journey was already weighing on me. My fixed income didn't allow for much flexibility, and the bus ticket would cost nearly $200 plus. I would need to find accommodation for the night, as the next bus wouldn't leave until morning. Walter, showing further kindness, introduced me to the station manager, who allowed me to spend the night in the waiting area, something they didn't typically permit but made an exception given my circumstances. Before leaving, Walter pressed a $100 bill into my hand, despite my protests. "My late wife would never forgive me if I didn't help," he said simply. The next 2 days were a grueling journey by bus, with uncomfortable seats, limited stops, and the constant hum of the engine that made sleep nearly impossible. I had to change buses twice, spending hours in unfamiliar stations. Throughout this ordeal, I continued attempting to contact Jackson and Allison, but my calls and texts remained unanswered. Finally, nearly 72 hours after being abandoned, I arrived back in our hometown, exhausted both physically and emotionally. A taxi took me from the bus station to Jackson and Allison's house, the place that had been my home for the past 18 months. But when I tried my key in the front door, it wouldn't turn. They had changed the locks. Standing on the porch with my taxi driving away, I felt a fresh wave of disbelief. Not only had they abandoned me hundreds of miles from home, but they had also ensured I couldn't return to my own residence. I called a locksmith, hoping they might be able to help, but was told that without proof of residence they couldn't legally let me in. I was standing there uncertain what to do next when Margaret and James, the neighbors from across the street, spotted me and came over. They had always been friendly, occasionally joining us for barbecues in the summer. Teresa, are you all right? Margaret asked, noting my disheveled appearance and obvious distress. When I explained what had happened, their shock mirrored what I had felt at that gas station in Wyoming. That's horrible, James said, shaking his head in disbelief. You'll stay with us tonight, of course. Their spare bedroom became my temporary sanctuary. After a shower and change into borrowed clothes from Margaret, I checked social media on my phone, something I rarely did. There, to my astonishment, were posts from Jackson and Allison, happy family photos at Yellowstone with Sophie and Tyler, all smiles as if nothing was wrong. There was no mention of me, no explanation of why the family was suddenly one member short. I tried calling Jackson again. This time he answered, but his tone was cold and dismissive. Mom, we're trying to enjoy our vacation. We can talk when we get back next week. Jackson, you left me stranded in Wyoming. I could have been hurt or worse, and now I can't even get into the house. You're overreacting. We knew you'd figure it out. You've always been resourceful. His voice dropped to a whisper. Look, Allison thought we all needed some space. We'll sort everything out when we get back. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. He was treating the abandonment of his elderly mother as if it were a minor inconvenience, something I should just figure out. The next day, with James's help, I was able to access the garage using an old remote control I still had in my purse. There, stacked carelessly against the wall, were my belongings hastily packed in boxes and plastic bags. It was clear this had been done before they left for vacation, another piece of evidence that my abandonment had been premeditated. As I sorted through my possessions, I discovered several items were damaged or missing altogether. A silver picture frame containing a photo of Franklin and me on our 40th anniversary was cracked. My grandmother's antique pearl necklace, a family heirloom I had planned to give to Sophie one day, was nowhere to be found. Neither was the small jewelry box containing the few valuable pieces I owned, including my wedding ring, which I had stopped wearing after Franklin's death but kept for sentimental reasons. That night, alone in Margaret and James's guest room, I cried until no more tears would come. Then, in that quiet darkness, something shifted inside me. The hurt and betrayal began to harden into resolve. I realized that Jackson and Allison expected me to wait submissively for their return to accept whatever explanation or half-hearted apology they offered, and to continue in the same unhealthy dynamic that had led to this situation. For the first time, I understood that I deserved better, and I began to consider what justice might look like. The next morning, I called Patricia, a longtime friend, who had retired from a successful career as an attorney several years earlier. We had met when our children were in elementary school together, and had maintained our friendship through the decades, supporting each other, through marriages, children's milestones, and eventually the loss of our husbands. They did what Patricia's voice rose in indignation as I recounted what had happened. Teresa, that's elder abandonment. It's a form of abuse in some states. I sighed, twisting the telephone cord between my fingers as I sat at Margaret's kitchen table. I don't want to press charges against my own son, Patricia. I just need to figure out what to do now. Do you have a copy of the house deed? She asked, her legal mind immediately focusing on practical matters. I did, fortunately. Before moving in with Jackson and Allison, I had organized all my important documents in a folder which I kept in my personal files. James had brought those boxes in from the garage yesterday. An hour later, I was sitting in Patricia's home office, the deed spread out on her desk. She adjusted her reading glasses, scanning the document carefully. Well, here it is, in black and white, she said finally. You own 25% of that house, Teresa. Your name is right here as a co-owner, not just as someone with a financial interest. This gives you rights. What kind of rights? I asked, not fully understanding the implications. As a co-owner, you have the right to access the property for one thing. They legally cannot keep you out by changing the locks. But more importantly, she paused, meeting my eyes directly. You have the right to sell your interest in the property. And depending on how the deed is structured, you might even have the right to force a sale of the entire property. The magnitude of what she was suggesting took a moment to sink in. You mean I could sell the house? Their house? Technically, it's your house too, Patricia reminded me. But this is complex legal territory. You need to speak with a current real estate attorney. I've been retired too long to give you specific advice, but I have someone I can refer you to. The next day, I met with Thomas Bailey, a real estate attorney Patricia had recommended. His office was modern and sleek, a stark contrast to my emotional turmoil. After reviewing the deed and listening to my situation, he confirmed what Patricia had suggested. Mrs. Miller, as a joint tenant with right of survivorship, which is how this deed is structured, you do indeed have the legal right to sell the property. All owners would normally need to agree, but there are mechanisms to force a sale if necessary. However, he added, leaning forward, before we discuss that route, I want to make sure you understand the implications. This would likely permanently damage your relationship with your son and his family. I took a deep breath, considering his words carefully. The moral debate I'd been having with myself since speaking with Patricia intensified. Would selling the house punish my grandchildren unfairly? Would I be stooping to Jackson and Allison's level by taking such a drastic action? But then I remembered the text message. The changed locks. My belongings carelessly packed and damaged. The family vacation continuing without a second thought for my welfare. The months of disrespect and dismissal leading up to the ultimate betrayal. I understand the implications, Mr. Bailey, I said finally, but I believe this may be the only way to teach them that actions have consequences. My grandchildren will be affected, yes, but perhaps this will be a valuable lesson for them too about treating family with respect. Thomas nodded, neither approving nor disapproving, maintaining his professional neutrality. In that case, I'll outline your options. The simplest would be to put the house on the market while they're still away. As a co-owner, you have that right. Given the current real estate market in your area, a well-priced home could sell very quickly, possibly before they even return from vacation. He explained the process in detail, the paperwork that would need to be filed, and his role in ensuring everything was legally sound. By the end of our 2-hour consultation, I had a clear plan and a newfound sense of empowerment. The next step was meeting with a real estate agent. Thomas recommended Samantha Rodriguez, who specialized in quick sales and had a reputation for efficiency. She came to Margaret's house the following day, a whirlwind of energy and confidence in a crisp business suit. The market is hot right now, Samantha explained after hearing my situation. Inventory is low and buyers are eager. If we price it right just slightly below market value, we could have multiple offers within days, possibly even cash offers that could close very quickly. She pulled up comparable sales in the neighborhood on her tablet, showing me what similar homes had sold for recently. Based on those figures and her knowledge of the market, she suggested a listing price of $495,000, about $15,000 below what she considered the home's true value, to attract immediate interest. I can have it listed by tomorrow, she assured me. I'll use the photos from when the previous owners listed it, updated with a few exterior shots I'll take today. We don't need to go inside right now. As Samantha worked on the listing, I found myself facing another practical challenge. Where would I live? Even with my share of the house sale, I needed to find an affordable long-term solution. After several phone calls and online searches, I discovered Cedar Grove, a senior apartment complex that offered reasonable rents and a community of people in my age group. I visited that afternoon and was pleasantly surprised by the clean, well-maintained facility and the friendly staff. A 1-bedroom apartment was available for immediate occupancy, requiring first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit totaling just under $3,000. It would stretch my remaining savings thin, but once the house sold, I would have financial security again. The manager, a kind woman named Lydia, listened to a simplified version of my situation and offered to expedite the application process. By that evening, I had signed a lease agreement with plans to move in the following day. James helped me transport my salvaged belongings from his garage to my new apartment. As I unpacked the hastily assembled boxes, I carefully documented each item that was missing or damaged, creating a detailed inventory with estimated values. Thomas had advised me to do this, as it might become relevant during the financial settlement after the house sale. A support system was forming around me, people who had heard my story and wanted to help. Church friends brought household items I needed for the new apartment. Former colleagues offered emotional support and practical assistance. Margaret organized a small group to help me settle in, bringing home cooked meals and keeping me company during those first difficult days. Meanwhile, Thomas and Samantha worked diligently on the legal and real estate aspects of my plan. The timing was crucial. We needed to move quickly while Jackson and his family were still away. Thomas prepared the necessary legal documents, ensuring everything was properly filed and recorded. Samantha arranged for professional photographs of the house exterior and created an enticing listing that went live exactly 3 days after I had returned from Wyoming. As I sat in my new apartment that evening looking at the online listing for what had been my home for the past 18 months, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and determination. This wasn't how I had envisaged my relationship with my son evolving in my later years, but his actions and those of his wife had forced me to find my own path to justice and independence. For the first time since that moment at the gas station, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. The road ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer a victim waiting for someone else to determine my fate. The open house event was scheduled for Saturday, just 5 days after the listing went live, and still 4 days before Jackson and his family were due to return from Yellowstone. Samantha had created an online listing that generated immediate interest, with dozens of inquiries within the first 24 hours. By Friday, she had scheduled 15 viewings for the open house and had received 3 preliminary offers sight unseen, a testament to the desirable neighborhood and the strategic pricing. I chose not to attend the open house, not wanting to explain the unusual circumstances to prospective buyers. Instead, I waited anxiously in my new apartment, checking my phone frequently for updates from Samantha. Around 3 in the afternoon, she called with exciting news. "Teresa, the open house is still going on, but I already have 7 offers. 2 are all cash, and 5 are above asking price." By Sunday evening, the picture was even clearer. We had received 12 offers in total, with the highest being $30,000 above the asking price. However, Samantha advised me to accept one of the cash offers even though it wasn't the highest, because it would allow for the fastest closing with the fewest complications. "They're offering $510,000 all cash with a 10-day closing," she explained. "No financing contingencies, no extended escrow. They've already been fully vetted by their bank." After consulting with Thomas, I agreed to accept this offer. The paperwork was prepared overnight, and by Monday morning I had signed my portion of the sale documents. Thomas assured me that as a legal co-owner, my signature was sufficient to proceed, though he warned that Jackson would likely contest the sale upon his return. "We're on solid legal ground," he reassured me, "but be prepared for a confrontation." That confrontation came sooner than expected. On Tuesday morning, I received a panicked call from Jackson. Mom, what's going on? Mrs. Peterson next door just called me saying there are strangers looking at our house and there's a sold sign in the yard." I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the conversation I had rehearsed in my mind. "Yes, Jackson, I sold the house." There was a moment of stunned silence before he exploded. You can't do that. That's our house. Where are we supposed to live?" I was a legal co-owner, Jackson. I had every right to sell my portion of the property. Perhaps you should have considered that before abandoning me at a gas station in Wyoming. "We're coming home right now," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "Don't do anything else. Don't sign anything else. This isn't over." The family arrived home the following day, cutting their vacation short by 3 days. I learned from Margaret, who called to warn me that they had returned to find not only the sold sign, but also a couple who had made a backup offer touring the exterior of the property. Margaret described the scene Allison having what could only be called a public meltdown on the front lawn, screaming about lawyers and theft, while Jackson tried unsuccessfully to calm her down. The children watched from the car, confused and frightened by their mother's behavior. I stayed in my apartment waiting for the inevitable confrontation. It came that evening in the form of a pounding on my door so forceful I feared it might break. When I opened it, Jackson and Allison stood there, both red-faced and wild-eyed with fury. Sophie and Tyler were nowhere to be seen, presumably left with a neighbor or friend. "How could you do this to us?" Jackson demanded, pushing past me into the small living room. "To your own grandchildren." Allison followed, pointing an accusing finger at me. "This is illegal. We'll sue you for everything you have." I closed the door calmly and turned to face them. "I've consulted with an attorney. The sale is perfectly legal. As a co-owner of the property, I had every right to sell." "Co-owner," Allison scoffed. "You gave us money for the down payment. That doesn't make you an owner." "Actually, it does," I replied, retrieving a copy of the deed from a folder on my coffee table and handing it to Jackson. "Your father always taught you to read contracts carefully." Perhaps you should have taken that lesson more to heart." Jackson stared at the document, the color draining from his face, as he realized the legal reality of the situation. His name, Allison's name, and my name were all listed as joint tenants with right of survivorship, each with clear ownership rights to the property. "Why would you do this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "Where are we supposed to go?" "Where was I supposed to go when you left me stranded at a gas station in Wyoming?" I countered. "How was I supposed to get home when you drove away knowing I was inside? What was I supposed to do when I finally made it back, after 3 days of grueling travel only to find you'd changed the locks?" Allison started to speak, but I held up my hand, not finished. "You packed my belongings, carelessly damaging family heirlooms. Items are missing, including jewelry of both monetary and sentimental value. You continued your vacation as if nothing had happened, posting happy family photos while I was struggling to find my way home. And you expected me to wait patiently for your return to accept whatever arrangement you decided was appropriate for me." I took a breath, steadying myself. "You treated me as if I had no value, no rights, and no dignity. This," I gestured around at my small apartment, "is me reclaiming all three." The meeting at Thomas's office the next day was tense. Jackson had brought his own attorney, a young man who spoke rapidly and kept shuffling papers importantly. Allison sat stone-faced beside Jackson, occasionally whispering furiously in his ear. Thomas calmly explained the legal situation. The house sale was legitimate and binding. The escrow process was already underway, with closing scheduled in 7 days. Jackson's attorney tried several angles to invalidate the sale, from claiming coercion to suggesting I lacked the mental capacity to understand what I was doing. Thomas dismissed each argument with professional courtesy but firm legal backing. He then presented the settlement details. I would keep my original investment of $85,000 plus 25% of the remaining proceeds after the mortgage was paid off, amounting to approximately $130,000 in total. The remainder would go to Jackson and Allison. "This settlement is more than fair," Thomas concluded. Mrs. Miller could have pursued additional damages for the emotional distress and financial hardship caused by being abandoned, as well as for the missing and damaged personal property. Jackson's attorney conferred quietly with his clients before reluctantly acknowledging that the sale would proceed. There was little they could do legally to stop it at this point. The practical impact of my actions became immediately apparent. Jackson and Allison were forced to find temporary housing with Allison's parents, who lived about 30 miles away, meaning longer commutes for work and a change of schools for the children. They had 30 days to vacate the property completely, as specified in the sale agreement. News of what had happened spread through our community, creating divided opinions. Some people, particularly those who knew me well or had heard the full story, understood and even applauded my actions. Others thought I had gone too far, punishing my grandchildren for their parents' mistakes. I received both supportive messages and critical ones, but remained firm in my conviction that I had done what was necessary to restore my dignity and independence. The most surprising reaction came from Jackson himself. About a week after the confrontation, he came to see me alone without Allison. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated posture I had never seen in him before. "The kids keep asking about you," he said after declining my offer of tea. "They don't understand what's happening." "I miss them," I admitted, "but this situation isn't of my making, Jackson." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "When we left you at that gas station, it was Allison's idea. She said you were smothering us, that we needed to make a clean break." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "I went along with it. I let her convince me it was necessary, that you'd be fine." "And the locks, my belongings?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "Also her idea, but I didn't stop her. I should have, but I didn't." For the first time, I saw a glimmer of understanding in my son's eyes, a recognition of the gravity of what they had done. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was the beginning of an acknowledgement that their actions had been deeply wrong. As he left, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mom, I never thought it would come to this." "Neither did I, Jackson," I replied softly. "Neither did I." 1 year has passed since that tumultuous summer when my life took such an unexpected turn. I am now settled comfortably in my senior community apartment, which I've made truly my own, with carefully chosen furnishings and personal touches. The walls display photos of my life with Franklin, my early years with Jackson, and a few precious recent pictures of my grandchildren. There are gaps in the timeline, a visual representation of the fracture in our family history, but it's an honest reflection of our journey. Cedar Grove has provided me with more than just housing. I've developed genuine friendships with several residents, particularly Ruth and Elaine, two widows with stories of their own family challenges. We have a standing lunch date every Thursday, and together we've joined a book club and a walking group. My days have a pleasant rhythm to them, now filled with activities I choose and people who value my company. The financial security from the house proceeds has transformed my retirement. After setting aside a portion for potential medical expenses, I've been able to travel modestly, taking a cruise to Alaska that Franklin and I had always dreamed of doing together. I volunteer at the local library twice a week, reading to children during story hour, which brings me joy and purpose. The first months after the house sale were characterized by complete estrangement from Jackson and his family. Allison refused any contact, and Jackson followed her lead. Though I occasionally received brief formal texts, updating me on practical matters related to the final stages of the house sale. The first sign of thawing came in December, a Christmas card with Sophie and Tyler's school pictures enclosed, and their carefully printed signatures beneath a generic holiday greeting. There was no note from Jackson or Allison, but I recognized it as a small opening, a tiny crack in the wall of silence. In February, I received the first secret phone call from Sophie. She was whispering clearly, calling without her parents' knowledge. "Grandma, it's me. I miss you." Those simple words brought tears to my eyes. We spoke for only a few minutes, Sophie telling me about school and her new interest in painting before she had to hang up abruptly. These calls became a semi-regular occurrence, always brief, always secretive, but precious connections to the grandchild I adored. By spring, I began to notice a shift in Jackson's communications. His texts became less formal occasionally, including personal details or questions about my well-being. I responded with equal measures of warmth and caution, unwilling to pretend the abandonment had never happened, but open to rebuilding some form of relationship. In April, I received an email from Jackson that marked a significant turning point. It was long and thoughtful, the first real acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he wrote. "What we did to you was unforgivable. I let Allison's frustrations and my own cowardice lead me to betray my own mother in the worst way. I have no excuse, only deep regret. I don't expect you to forget or even to forgive, but I want you to know that I understand now how terribly wrong we were." He went on to explain that he and Allison had been in counseling working through their own relationship issues that had contributed to the toxic environment that led to my abandonment. He made no excuses, placed no blame on me, and asked for nothing, except the possibility of a conversation. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a public park with a small cafe, on a sunny Saturday in May. I arrived early, my stomach knotted with anxiety, uncertain of what to expect, or how I would feel seeing my son again after months of minimal contact. Jackson arrived alone, looking both nervous and determined. We ordered coffee and found a quiet table overlooking a small pond where ducks swam peacefully, oblivious to the human drama unfolding nearby. The conversation was difficult, but necessary. Jackson spoke openly about the months leading up to the Yellowstone trip, how he had allowed Allison's resentment of my presence to fester, how he had failed to stand up for me, and ultimately how he had participated in a cruel act that he would regret for the rest of his life. "I don't expect you to ever fully trust me again," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But I want to try to make amends in whatever way you'll allow." I shared my own experience. The fear and humiliation of being abandoned, the grueling journey home, the shock of finding myself locked out, and the deep hurt of realizing how little I had been valued by my own family. I didn't minimize the pain or soften the reality of what they had done. I needed to stand up for myself, I explained. Selling the house wasn't about revenge, though I won't deny there was some satisfaction in it. It was about reclaiming my dignity and independence. By the end of our 2-hour conversation, we had reached no dramatic reconciliation, but we had established a foundation of honesty upon which something new might be built. We agreed to continue talking, to proceed slowly, and to be patient with the process of healing. Allison has remained more resistant to reconciliation. Her pride was deeply wounded by the house sale, and she continues to frame herself as the victim in the situation. However, she has reluctantly agreed to allow me limited contact with the children's supervised visits, once a month in public places, like parks or family restaurants. These meetings are initially awkward but increasingly warm as Sophie and Tyler remember the bond we once shared. Tyler was confused at first, having been told a sanitized version of events, but children have an innate sense for authenticity, and he seems to understand on some level that the adults in his life are working through complicated feelings. Jackson and I have established a routine of monthly dinners, just the two of us, at a restaurant halfway between our homes. These evenings are sometimes tense, sometimes surprisingly comfortable, as we navigate our new relationship. We are rebuilding trust slowly, brick by brick, with no expectation that it will ever be exactly what it was before. The experience has taught me profound lessons about family boundaries and self-respect. I had always believed that sacrifice for family was noble and necessary, and to some extent I still believe that. But I've learned that sacrifice without reciprocal respect becomes self-destruction. That loving someone doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. That even in my 60s, I had to learn to value myself enough to stand up against injustice, even when it came from those I loved most. I've also learned about forgiveness not as an eraser of consequences, but as a release from the prison of bitterness. I am working on forgiving Jackson, and even Allison, not for their benefit primarily, but for my own peace of mind. This forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the abandonment never happened. It doesn't erase the need for them to earn back trust through consistent, respectful behavior over time. But it does mean I'm choosing not to let their actions define the remainder of my life. My journey continues with both challenges and joys along the way. I'm building a life that honors both my past and my present, that includes family to the extent possible, while maintaining the boundaries necessary for my well-being. It's not the retirement I had envisioned, but there is satisfaction in knowing that when faced with the unimaginable, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. For those of you watching who might be facing your own family challenges, remember that love should never require the sacrifice of your dignity. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and ultimately for those who have hurt you, is to insist on the respect you deserve. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that others might not understand, but that you knew was right for you? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your self-worth. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to write your own on your terms.